Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Dr. Bruce Solheim, a history professor, Fulbright scholar, and author of the timeless Trinity trilogy that covers a host of paranormal phenomena. Today we're going to talk about mediumship, spirit guides, and protection. Bruce, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Johnny. It's great to be here.
The Timeless Trinity, what brought you to start writing those books? And I believe it is a trilogy, correct?
Yes, it is. Well, I've had paranormal experiences my whole life. But I was too afraid to talk about them in polite society, right? Especially in the world of academics, or before that, I was working at Boeing, corporate world. And before that, I was in the Army for 6 years. So none of those seemed to be the appropriate place to be talking about talking to dead people and having been visited by aliens and that kind of stuff. So I kept it to myself. And it was really in 2016 when a really dear friend of mine passed away. And he came to me in a vision about a month after. His name is Gene. And Gene came to me and said, now's the time to start telling your stories. It's important for you to do so. And he even gave me the name of the series. He said it should be called Timeless. So that's how that started.
That's pretty amazing. So he actually came to you in a dream or a meditative state, or how did that happen?
It's in that half wake, half sleeping state, meditative state. He came to me in a very clear vision, just like you and I are talking. And I remember the first thing I said, I was kind of shocked, although I've had these experiences before, but he had only passed away a month before. And I said, it's great to see you. And I asked what a lot of people would probably ask, what's it like to be dead?
What's it like?
And he laughed. He had a great sense of humor. He laughed and he said, well, yeah, I think, everything is great. And besides, he said, if I was really dead, would I be talking to you? There's life after death. So that was his point.
Who would not want to have that kind of gift, that ability to talk to our friends and family that have passed? It's pretty rough whenever we lose someone, which we all do. It's also a shame that we have to be mindful of certain societal restraints that, especially in your case, being in the world of academia, you have your professional reputation to think about, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There were those that, although I was generally accepted and actually people sought me out about their experiences, I was kind of like a safe harbor for them, colleagues and stuff, other professors. Mm-hmm. But I did have a couple people say, well, you realized you committed academic suicide. If you ever wanted to apply for another professor position, you probably shut that door. And I said, well, I'm so close to retirement, I don't really care. Nobody's gotten rid of me yet. A couple more years, I'll be retired. The time really was right. It really was right to tell the stories. I could still function,
right,
lucidly.
Exactly. And it's a shame that with those kind of, I don't know if you want to call them abilities or sensibilities, but it seems to me that should qualify you above and beyond the norm for a position, an appropriate position. But obviously our culture hasn't quite got there yet.
Yeah, you're right. There are those that appreciate it. There are those that would appreciate it. And maybe all of those realms. Look at the military in the 70s, or the Defense Department hiring psychics to spy on the Russians and so forth. So I think there's the acknowledgement that, yes, it does exist, but in polite society, we don't really like to, talk about it being real. The media makes fun of it, whenever there's stories of ghosts or aliens. They usually, scoff or make a big, kind of a funny piece for the last part of their segment.
I've seen those kind of comments on whenever I post, shows like this. There's always the knucklehead element, unfortunately. Maybe it scares them. Maybe they just don't get it. I think it's really cool. In this material, your books, you've had, I think it's 34 incidents of paranormal events, telepathy, telekinesis, ghosts, demons. I told you that before. That scares the hell out of me. Guardian angels, precognition, near-death experiences. Do you want to tell us about some of these experiences?
Yeah. The 3 books document 89 different experiences. So the last one was 34, I think, different events. I'm not sure exactly where to start. I mean, you start at the beginning, when it opened up for me in northern Norway. I had an angelic healing experience when I was 4 years old. And I was very sick. I was on a remote island 200 miles above the Arctic Circle. And I couldn't move my head. I remember my neck was stiff. All my arms and legs weren't working right. I had a high fever. Mm-hmm. They thought I was going to die. I was crying and I kind of cried myself to sleep in this little bed my grandmother had in the kitchen in this old farmhouse that we were living in at the time. When I woke up, there was this being, this angelic being, although it was just light, but I knew it was this healing, wonderful thing. It took away all my fear and I went to sleep. And when I woke up, my grandmother, my mother were in the kitchen. I got up and I was moving around like I usually do. And my mother said it was a miracle. And my grandmother said it was a miracle. And they said, I told them about the light, the healing light. And they said it was my guardian angel. So from that point on, I think what that did is it just opened up this whole world to me. I've been living with ever since, this paranormal world or this high strangeness type of world.
You started obviously very early. This was in Norway, correct?
Yeah, northern Norway. Yeah.
Right. Do you feel that the culture in a non-American locale is a little bit more accepting of the paranormal and angels and that type of thing than we are here in the States?
I think in Norway in general, they have a tradition of trolls and magical things. But the farther north you go up in Norway, the more you have these kinds of beliefs and it's more standard. It's not scoffed at. They still leave porridge in their barns on Christmas. So to avoid the Nissen or the little elves, the mischievous elves from souring their milk or whatever, So it's a tradition that continues, whether people really believe it or not. They seem to. And ghosts and spirits are part of that. I've had people just take it for granted. Now, I've been other places in the world, like in Austria in the Alps, in a very small town in the Alps, had a ghost experience there, talked to the village priest, and he says, oh, yeah, we see her all the time. It's just part of their life. They just accept it. They don't question it. They don't make a big deal of it. It's not like they go around, oh, my God, there's ghosts here. They don't have big signs, come see the ghost or whatever. It's just part of their life. It's very natural to them. And I think that's the way probably we all were in days gone by, and that we all had a more natural relationship to these things.
Interesting. Of these experiences, the telepathy, the telekinesis, I'm not sure I want to talk about demons, but the guardian angels in particular are interesting because I think a lot of people get the guardian angels confused with the spirit guides. Does that mean they are the same thing to certain people, or they're not necessarily the same type of angel?
It depends on the person. I can tell you in my experience, my guardian angel, the one that came to me at age 4, I'm fairly certain it was one of my spirit guides named Theodora. Now, Theodora is female, an angelic being, a being of light. So I would consider her to be both spirit guide and guardian angel. And I think they can pull double duty. I mean, they're in that magical realm, spiritual realm, so they can do more than one thing. Now, it could be people have separate ones. I think everybody's different. I do have another spirit guide that is not a guardian angel. He doesn't even talk. He's just a strongman type. He looks like a Native American chief. He's the one that protects me when I do my mediumship. In fact, I ask him to help me because you have to have protection when you do these things. Otherwise, you can invite in some very unwelcome, terrible entities, and you don't want that. Believe me.
I can only imagine. I haven't had that happen, but I'm pretty sensitive to certain vibes. So for someone that is really interested in this, and especially, in the positive energy, they want to contact their guides. Maybe they want to become a medium. Maybe they've already done that. What's a typical entry point for them to kind of wade into these waters safely, of course?
I would find a mentor or get a book from a person that is highly respectable. In my case, I knew a couple people who were mediums, and I'd had these experiences my whole life speaking to dead people. So it wasn't like I was a rook just starting at square one. It's important for everybody to have a mentor, somebody trustworthy. And you have to be careful because the world is filled with charlatans and people that'll easily take your money. If you're asking for help and somebody immediately brings up money, maybe you ought to look the other way. Just say, hey, I don't want just a reading. Can you tell me how this works? And if they're legitimate people, they'll say, okay, this is how it works. They'll point you to a couple of books or something, and then take it a step at a time. The advice that I got several years ago was we're all as psychic as we need to be. So some people are going to be more psychic and have more abilities than others because they can handle it. And other people are probably not going to be able to handle it. So they have to be careful, even more careful. That being said, everybody needs to be careful when they approach these things because, like I said, if you don't have protection, when you do the mediumship, when you raise your consciousness or your vibration, whatever people want to call it. I prefer to call it consciousness. Some people call it vibration. I consider it to be like putting up a big radar dish above your head, and all these entities will hone in on you. You're going to bring it all in, right? Radio signals, whatever, you're going to bring it all in. You have to have protection because if you don't, there's nothing between you and whatever that entity is. And that's where spirit guides and guardian angels or whatever you want to call them will come into play. In my case, I have a procedure that I do. I'm happy to share with anybody who wants to know what I do. But the first thing I always say is you need to learn how to turn it off before you really need to learn how to turn it on. So if you've never had a mediumship experience, you have to know that you have to be able to turn it off, because what I went through, struggled with my whole life, was having this come on automatically. So I would have these frequent and random experiences. Like, for instance, I'd go to a party. I've always hated going to parties. And most people, they like, it's fun to go to a party. But for me, I hadn't learned how to bring this radar dish down. So I'd walk into a room with a bunch of people, and all of a sudden I'm hearing all these different voices, and not just their voices, but people that aren't there. Or I hear what their intentions are. A lot of people say, oh, do you read minds? I don't think anybody reads minds. What they do is they read intentions, what people are projecting out there. Like maybe they're being deceptive, or they're saying one thing, thinking something else. And if you walk into a room and there's like 50 people there, and they're all saying stuff in this world, and they're also have these intentions and these inner voices going off that you can listen into, it's very confusing, and it's very disconcerting. And what I would always do is just kind of either leave, or I would retreat to one quiet corner, find one person that I could talk to so I could tune out everything else. People would criticize, oh, you should mingle. Hey, I'm mingling already in my head. I don't want that. I want to talk to one person at a time. So you have to be able to turn that off. And what you have to do is imagine the radar dish coming down and like a sign going up that says closed. You don't want any of that stuff. Or you can imagine a big radio knob, turning it off, and then put yourself into a position where you're not receiving all this stuff. It's more difficult to learn how to turn it off than it is to turn it on.
To turn it on, right.
So, and some people naturally just have it turned on all the time, which is what I did. That's why these things happen so frequently and randomly. And it really took a lot for me to learn how to manage it. I never say control, because that assumes you have omniscient powers, which none of us do, godlike powers. You can learn to manage it, turn it off, turn it on when necessary, have your protection. And you really have to be very methodical about it. You slip up once and it can be devastating, especially if you're very intuitive and very sensitive. I think that's really important for a person starting off, is knowing that you can turn it on, but you should learn how to turn it off before you turn it on. Because if you just learn how to turn it on, you don't know how to turn it off, you can get yourself into some big trouble.
What's unusual is that most people that I know would really like to be able to walk in a room and know everyone's intention, but they might not be aware of the fact that they might not be able to manage it. They can't turn it off when they need to.
Or you might not be able to pinpoint, okay, you hear some intention, but is it that person or the person next to them? And then it's confusing. And then what do? You treat them both the same, or it gets very, very confusing.
You might just want to go to the bar at that point and just kind of take a break, coffee, whatever.
You can understand why people who are very sensitive might want to drink a lot to just numb all that stuff and try to turn down the noise. We have alcoholics in the family, so I've always avoided strong drink, but I could see why people would seek that maybe as a way to kind of numb it or tone it down.
Yeah, definitely something a lot of people don't even consider. Are there books, some titles that you can mention? Because for those of us that don't have access to a mentor or don't want to go through calling 20 or 30 psychics, because there's no way for us to really gauge whether they're really good or not. What do? You go on Facebook and find a bunch of people? Maybe.
You can always ask around, or if people want, they can email me. If you put up my email or some link somewhere, I'm more than happy to steer somebody into a direction of somebody that I know that's very, very good, legitimate and good. Now, they do it for a living, so that means eventually, if you want their services, they do charge. And I'm not against people doing that. I never do that. I just always do it as a favor. If somebody says, I want to talk to my dear Uncle Louie, who passed away last year, and I know the person, and I say, sure, when I can, I'll try. I never charge anybody to do it. But there are people who do charge, and it's because that's their living. I have a day job, so I don't really need to do that. And once you start charging people money, they want it to be 100% accurate. And the thing is, it can never be 100% accurate.
It's good to know that.
Because there's too many variables. It's like tuning in an old radio. You kind of got it between stations. And even at the very best, when you're listening to somebody who's passed on in the spirit world, it sounds like you're kind of between stations. And it's just a very faint signal line that's coming in. And you have to separate it from all the other noise. And you can't put too much expectation on it. Like, man, I really want to get this right because my friend is really, suffering. And if I don't get this right, you got to take all that pressure off yourself and relax and just listen the best you can and do the best you can. And you hope that you can help the person, because that's really the point of mediumship, is helping people. The point is not to be 100% accurate. And people will say disappointing things, like you'll do it what you think is a pretty good reading and give them the information, and in my case for free, and then they'll come back later and complain and say, well, you didn't get their middle name right, and you were off by one day, their birthday. Do you understand that I was speaking to a dead person? Am I going to hear everything properly? And then if you add language differences and cultural differences and the way people talk. Some people are very loud in the spirit world, some people are very quiet. And people email me, I'll tell them some personal recommendations. There are some very reputable, real people out there who can do this stuff. And they're fairly well known in these big circles. If you were to do a YouTube search or a Google search, whatever, you would find these people. It is a caveat emptor situation, kind of, buyer beware. If they immediately start asking for a bunch of money and all you want is just to get the basics to understand how it's done, then you have to be a little wary of that.
Let's say we get a mentor and a preparation done. How does someone contact their spirit guides? They want to find their guardian angels and or their spirit guides. If they're the same person, they want enlightenment. They want to get to higher ground. How do they go about doing that?
Everybody is probably familiar. Even if you're not a religious person, you're probably familiar with the practice of prayer. I mean, what is prayer but the paranormal, right? Because what are you doing? You're communicating with God, or who you think is God, a higher power. You can start with that, something you know. Always start with something you know. And then you have to ask for help. You'd say, I'd like to know who my spirit guides are. Who has been with me since day one? Who's been with me since I was born? Please let me know. Give me a sign. And then ask for protection at the same time. If you're a religious person, you believe in God, you say, dear God, protect me while I reach out to see, to get these answers, to get this information. If you don't believe in God, a higher power or nature, the universe. Yeah, whatever a person is comfortable with. And it's really just between you and that signal line. You need to pick up on that signal line, whatever gets you there. You don't need incantations and robes and candles and, witchy clothes or anything. All that adds to the theater of it. It makes it really interesting and cool. If that puts you into the mood to do it better, then that's fine. But you don't really need any of that stuff. Here's one book I will recommend by Dean Radin, called Real Magic. It's a great book. He's actually a scientific researcher. He's the head of IONS, which is the Institute of Noetic Sciences, the chief scientist there. And he's a friend of mine. He's been a guest speaker in my paranormal classes. He says it really comes down to this: attention and intention. And we have incredible power. We as human beings have incredible power. If we can focus our attention and then have the intention of doing something, we can do some pretty amazing things. So once you do that, you get that focused calm. Then you go into, if you're familiar with the prayer mode, go into the prayer and just ask for the identity of your spirit guides. And it will come to you. It might not come to you like you've got mail. It might not come in like that quick, but it will come to you. And it could come in the form of, and this is important, once you pick up that signal line, sometimes it's like a sound. Sometimes it's imagery. I was at a book signing and this lady put me on the spot and she said, can you do a reading for me right now? I said, well, I'm just signing the books, And she said, no, I really would like it. So I said, okay. And I'm not a person who can sit there and meditate and do this. I have to move. So my meditation is walking meditation.
Did you just read my mind? I think you did, because I just wanted to ask you that just now. The spirit walk.
Spirit walk.
How does it differ from meditation, or is it just another?
Same thing.
Same thing.
Same thing. Like in the Islamic religion, they have the whirling dervishes. They do their meditation spinning around in circles, right? So you can be moving. For me, I like to move. I get into my meditative state by doing my spirit walk. That's how I do. I get focused, calm. I pick up the signal line and I do my protection, of course, and then I can ask to talk to people. They don't always want to talk, but most of the time they do. But I always talk to certain people, certain relatives. I always talk to a friend like Gene. I always talk to him. Every spirit walk, I'll talk to him because we're connected. And I have some other more mystical entities that I talk to as well, and they help me navigate that world and give me advice and so forth. Even sometimes predictions about coming events and so forth. So that's really what it is. You have attention, intention, you protect yourself, you go into this meditative mode through a prayer or however you want to do it, ask for that protection, and then open yourself up. Have that radar dish up, because now you can feel confident because you got the protection. If you got the radar dish up without protection, heaven help you. What's going to happen? I consider my spirit guides, well, especially the one that doesn't talk. I call him Ozzy, which is funny. It's kind of like Ozzy Osbourne, right? He's wild and crazy, right? Anyway, no, he doesn't talk. He's kind of like a bouncer. He won't let any bad things in. So I can be confident. And then Theodora, who's the angelic female counterpart to that, she's the one who facilitates the connection. She talks, she can facilitate it. Ozzy's job is to keep me safe. Since I've been doing the protections, I haven't had any bad incidents. So that's good.
Can it be as simple as you described before, is to ask for help, ask for protection? I want to know the identity of my spirit guide or my guard and or my guardian angel.
Yeah.
Please protect me in the process. I have a quick thing that I tend to do every day. I read the book, The Gentle Way by Tom Moore, which I think is really cool. One of the things he does is he just simply asks for a benevolent outcome.
Yes.
I request a benevolent outcome for my podcast recording today, for instance.
Yeah.
When it involves someone besides yourself, the mode is you ask any and all angels, and tell me if this is dangerous or not, any and all angels to protect my family and friends in these turbulent times that we are in at the moment.
I think that's great. That's the kind of thing, because the intention is to do good, is to make a good connection to help. If that's your intention, because the reverse part of this, it's kind of like Star Wars. There's the Force, and there's a good way to use the Force, and there's the other way. Because it's powerful the other way too. You could get this focused attention and intention and say, I would like to do harm to this person. God forbid I would ever say that, but you could work it that way too. The problem with that is not that it doesn't work, because it can work. There's other variables involved, but there's always a rebound effect. If you put that out there, that's going to come back to you at least as bad as what you sent out there. So the old fashioned thing is you meet at the crossroads and you make a deal with the devil. Well, that is the deal. If you're going to do that kind of stuff with the abilities that we have, it's going to come back on you, and it's going to hurt you. That's the secret of it. And in Dean Radin's book, he tells you about this. And then he says at the close of one chapter, he says, you have been warned. So it's like, I'm giving you the secrets here, but you've been warned. And, don't come back to me and say, hey, it didn't work out too well. And it's from his scientific viewpoint. So it's not going to have a bunch of spells in it or something. It's from a scientist's mind. It's really cool. And he was part of the Operation Stargate, the psychic spies. He was part of that. And
oh, wow.
He worked for SRI, and he's got a lot of credentials. And he's a really nice person, really good guy. That's a good book for anybody who wants to start off, to find out really what's going on, and then find a mentor. Maybe that's a good suggestion.
My feeling is many people kind of foray into this world with good intentions, but they might leave the proverbial radar dish open without knowing the dangers present. The thought of the bad and the negative, I don't even want to go anywhere near that.
I avoid it at all costs if I can. I know it's out there and I acknowledge it, but I'm protected from it, and I put up lots of levels of protection, whether it's during the day, at night, when I go on my spirit walk. It's not like I only ask for protection when I do my spirit walk. I ask for protection all the time, because I know how sensitive I am. And when you're connected, when you have had experiences, you're halfway into that other world. So those that are in that dimension can see you easier. I think it was described by Whitley Strieber, who wrote Communion. He said that they can look at us from this, he's talking about aliens, or the visitors, as he calls them. And they can see people that are like bright lights. Those are the people they go for, because they know they can connect to them. It's going to be easier to connect to them than some guy walking around saying it's all BS and I don't believe any of it and I never had any experience. They're probably not going to bother with that person. They're going to go to the person that has some kind of identifying marker, whether it's a bright light, as Whitley Strieber says, or in my case, I say a radar dish. That's who they want to come to. So you got to be protected. You got to be careful. I don't like to scare people, but I think it is important to be protected. This idea of the Ouija board, the reason I don't fool around with any of that stuff, I don't know where it came from. I don't know what kind of energy's been put into it. I didn't create it. I don't trust it. Now, some people can have a good experience. Maybe it's fun for them. But for me, I don't know what's attached to that. And it can be very deceptive and very alluring, So I'm very, very careful with that kind of stuff. And it's easy to get attachments when you're a sensitive person. You can even unintentionally get these attachments that can be detrimental to your health and to your well-being.
The Ouija board, that's another thing that scares me. I don't want to go anywhere.
I don't mess with it.
Yeah, I don't mess with it either. It's a lot more than a parlor game. You mentioned aliens a few minutes ago. I imagine that has something to do with the quantum realm and maybe on the periphery of such.
Yeah, this is what I've learned, and it's my theory, is that, and it's not just my theory, there are many others who think this too, including physicists who believe this, that the spirit world, the alien world, and the quantum world are all really the same thing. They operate in the same realm. So if you understand, and that's why I studied quantum physics. I'm not going to say I'm well versed in quantum physics, but I've dabbled in it, understanding it. It's really hard to understand, it really is, because it's mind blowing. But, this basic understanding of it kind of helps frame everything else. Like, how is it these ghosts, let's take ghosts, for instance, they can vibrate into our reality. All of a sudden they appear out of nowhere, right? And then they disappear. Or they go through walls, and this is the classic ghost story. So we've read that. We've heard people talk about this, or maybe we've had those experiences, as I've had. And then you hear about alien abductions. These aliens, they can come, they vibrate into our reality from out of nowhere. And then they can go through ceilings and they can take you with them and make you vibrate in their frequency and leave with you and abduct you. So it seems to me that how they're doing this is very much the same thing. And I have a friend of mine who's a physicist, and he actually ran a lab at Stanford. His name is Ed Young, Dr. Ed Young. He's retired now. But anyway, he said it's really basically simple, that what's happening is that these aliens or these ghosts or whatever can vibrate. He calls it vibrating from into our reality and vibrate out. It's a frequency.
Frequencies. So is there a relationship between frequencies, like on that radio dial that we're all familiar with, frequencies and dimensions, which are also referred to as densities, i.e. third density going up to the fourth and fifth? Is that the same thing, or?
I believe so. And if you look into quantum physics, there's this idea of the quantum wave theory and there's a famous experiment is the double slit experiment, where they pass photons through a very narrow aperture. And if you observe this, the pattern is that they are particles. It comes out as a particle on the screen on the other side. If it's not observed but recorded, it comes across as waves. So they're both particles and waves. So we're all particles and waves depending on whether we're being observed or not. We are waves. And I drew an illustration once based on a discussion I had with my, I call them my spiritual high advisors. They were trying to explain this like I'm a dummy, which I am really when it comes to this stuff. And they're saying, well, when you're doing your walking meditation, where are you located? And I said, well, I'm on this street, going from here to there. No, but where are you located? Well, I'm on the street. But where, at what moment in time are you? And then they showed me this blur. I was just a blur, and I became a wave. I wasn't just in one place. I was in multiple locations because I was moving. And that was their simple way of trying to get me to understand, multiple locality or bilocality or non-locality, this idea that we are just waves. And then when we need to create reality for ourselves, we turn things into particles and we make them solid in front of us. Like I can see my computer keyboard and the light and other things, around me. But in actuality, these things are all waves. The quantum world, the way things really are, is much different than what we see. We create the reality that we see to make it easier for us to understand.
And this may, in the long run, make the paranormal easier to understand. Yes. We got a couple more minutes today, but I think we definitely have the making of a part 2. This is a whole nother chapter. It's very cool stuff. And one of the things that I think we would maybe venture into next time is how all this relates to ascension. Going back to the third density, I've talked to a lot of people about moving from the third density to the fourth or fifth or whatever, or moving away from the male energy and going towards the female energy. And it seems like a lot of these folks are maybe talking about the same thing, right?
I believe they are. Yeah. We all have a piece of the puzzle, right?
Yes. Excellent. Really, really cool stuff here. How do our listeners find you online?
You can go to my website, which has all my projects on it. Just my name, BruceOlavSolheim.com. And Olav, my middle name is spelled O-L-A-V, last name S-O-L-H-E-I-M. So BruceOlavSolheim.com. And all my books are listed there. You can also go to Amazon and look up Bruce Solheim and find all my books, including my books that are not paranormal books, my standard history books and stuff. And also, I did a comic book, too, recently that's somehow tied into all this because the lead character in the comic book is a alien half-breed, a hybrid character.
Right. Hybrids.
And it kind of brings all my interests together into one place. That's why I love this comic book. Maybe we can talk about that next time, too, how all this fits together, strangely.
Exactly, because I think that is an objective for many of us is what's the answer? How do we put all these different influence and events and phenomena together? And I think there's a matrix, that there's pieces of a puzzle. Excellent. I will put all those links in the show notes. So, Bruce, thanks so much for joining us.